I started commercial fishing in 1954. At that time, the fishing was a wild, wild west. Good money, even then it was good money. I made enough I could have bought 2 houses in 1954.
I was in my early teens, and they asked me if I would go as a skiffman. And I said, oh, hell yes. I took a week off from school, went fishing. We had a good catch. I got $350 for the 5 days. That's how it got me started thinking about being a fisherman.
It was a lifestyle. So everyone we knew and we grew up with were fishermen, and we all would go out together. It allowed families to work together.
When I turned 16, I had enough money I could just buy a car. So the money was good. For a young kid, it was spectacular. And I got to spend time with my dad. So this was a paid vacation almost, you know. There was lots of hard work, but it definitely was a unique way to spend the summers.
I used to think when I was out on the boat on a good day and we were making money that we had the best job that you could ever possibly imagine in British Columbia. It was that good then.
I got to like it and stayed with it, but it was risky all the time and anything could happen.
My dad's name was Rick Johansson, and him going to work meant just not seeing him. He just wasn't there. I mean, he'd be gone 1 or 2 months. The only time we kind of wondered about when he would go away was when he would come back and tell us stories about things that happened. It was just what happened when you were fishing, but they never presented it as a danger.
In 1961, I lost 8 friends on a boat by the name of Northview. We're traveling together, going to fish up in Myers Pass. The wind came up. That's the last we saw him. That's where he flipped over. We only found 1 body. I wanted to quit fishing altogether, but I didn't know how to do anything else.
We took a chance to cross Hecka Straits. Weather report was not very good. By the time you get halfway across, you took a hell of a beating. There was another boat behind us, and they were buried under a swell and never seen or heard of since. And 7 men got lost on it, and there's nothing you can do about it. You feel bad about it until time heals everything and you forget. And it's part of life.
Fishing has been done on this coast for centuries. Many First Nations engaged in fairly large-scale fishing and became quite skilled at doing it. But the major fishery in British Columbia began with the canning industry that followed the exploration to this part of the world before the beginning of the 1900s.
The men pull in their nets, throw them into the boat, and then they proceed to go over the drift once more. Very often, they keep at this business for 5 days at a time. It's a tough grind, but they don't mind.
The workers' compensation legislation was first passed in the legislature in 1916, and it did include some fishermen, those who were actually directly working for a cannery and fish on the cannery's behalf. But a whole lot of independent fishermen were excluded from that and not considered workmen under the Act. So if a fisherman died, his widow and any children that he had were left with nothing. There was no income coming in. The United Fishermen and Allied Workers Union was formally founded in 1945, and it was the culmination, in effect, of a series of mergers that had taken place among a number of unions within the industry. And it enabled the United Fishermen and Allied Workers Union to speak with one voice on health and safety issues. BC Supreme Court Justice Gordon Sloan was tasked by the provincial government to look into the functioning of workers' compensation in the resource industries in British Columbia. The union had put forward the proposition in the Royal Commission proceedings asking for fishermen to be included as workmen under the Workers' Compensation Act. Sloan initially said in 1942 that he didn't have enough information to make a decision and just put it aside. But in 1952, he actually dismissed any such proposition that fishermen could be included as workmen, and he said it was actually a fiction to believe that they were workmen.
Fishermen were considered independent operators. They were co-adventurers. There was no worker-employer relationship under the Workmen's Compensation Act. What there was a buyer-seller relationship. The Act had no provisions for buyers and sellers. It was confined to employers and workers.
We had no safety equipment to begin with, none. You had a survival ring, one on each side, and that was it. There was no one that could tell you anything that would make it safer. You just went fishing and that was the end of it.
Safety was not really on the radar. You went out there and you hoped that you'd come back with some money in your pocket, and you learned the hazards one by one.
The big companies, anything that would cost them money, they were not in favor of it. And in a way, we didn't blame them, but we argued like hell, and we tried to pressure WCB to institute laws that would protect our fishing members.
In 1975, it really sort of came to a head because there was a new fishery that emerged for roe herring, and it was going to markets in Japan. Very lucrative fishery in its early days, but run like a high, fast-paced derby fishery.
It made it more competitive. So everyone wanted to be involved in it now, and it only got sort of worse from there.
It takes place in March, that fishery, where the weather is not very conducive to safety. There's lots of storms. The boats, a lot of them hadn't been loaded for a long time, so some of their watertight integrity was compromised. They're taking too much fish on board.
Roe herring considered dangerous cargo. It slides around the boat a lot, and when the water's in the fish holds, you get what's called free surface effects. So there were conditions out there that were adverse to the stability of those vessels, and combined with the weather, very bad combination.
And a lot of times you took a chance and got away with it. But once in a while, the law of averages catches up to you, and that's what happens.
March 25th, 1975, my dad and my uncle and the other 4 crew members were crossing the Hecate Strait. Another boat was traveling behind them. They talk as they go across, and then didn't hear from them again. Their boat was found floating upside down. A search was started, and so we were just waiting for them to be brought home. It was a couple days before, they finally called off the search, and we realized that they weren't coming home, and they were all lost.
There were 14 people that died in 2 months of this fishery, which was a pretty staggering amount for just that time, which really focused the issue, I think, not only for the government, but for the industry and for the public.
For me, it was like life was over. It was really hard to see what else there was. It just kind of rips away who you are and your identity, and you have to start over. It was coast-wide. It wasn't one particular spot, and people were being lost and rescued, and people were dying. So there was this West Coast inquiry finally.
And the fishermen pressed very hard that now was the time to move on this legislation. And so finally the government did act. They brought in legislation that included coverage for fishermen under the legislation.
Essentially a stroke of the pen called fish buyers employers, and it called fish sellers workers. And so with that very easy change, fishermen then became workers. They could be covered under the Workers' Compensation Act. The board's position was, well, if we're going to be compensating people for injuries, we certainly have a right under the Act to go out and do prevention work. So officers could, for the first time, go out on fish boats to conduct inspections. There were many, many orders written. A lot of good work was done. But I think at the time, because it was so new, it was almost too much, too quickly.
And that's where the industry just pushed back and said, it's not a bad idea, but it won't work on a boat.
At that point, the federal government saw that they could step in again and reassert their right to occupational health and safety in the fishing industry. They did so successfully. And for my entire career, board officers were not permitted to go on those vessels. They had no jurisdiction.
The industry, because now they had to pay for it, did begin some initiatives, and the union itself began developing a number of programs, one of which was the Beachline Safety Course, and brought in a whole number of innovations that are still being used in the industry. In 1995, there were again a series of fatalities in the herring industry and also in salmon, and it really highlighted the issue of vessel safety and vessel stability. and reintroduce the need for an inspection process and also a process of Transport Canada working with Workers' Compensation Board to coordinate this work and to determine which areas fell to Workers' Compensation and which fell to Transport Canada.
Nobody wanted a repeat of 1975, so what the board very wisely decided on was to get out on the docks, have town hall meetings, talk to industry about the kinds of things that industry might like to see in terms of new fishing regulations.
At the same time, Workers' Compensation Board made some funding available in 2001 to 2004 to say to industry, we're prepared to partner with you in working for a safer culture within the industry.
What the board wanted was an industry association that would set about the work of getting out on those boats and bringing fishermen together and doing the work of occupational health and safety with the fishing fleet.
And so I came on board in 2004 to look at creating a vehicle for fishermen to take ownership of their own safety, rather than someone telling them what they should be doing. And we called it Fish Safe. It's owned by fishermen, it's run by fishermen, all the programs are developed by fishermen with the help of experts. So over the last 10 years with Fish Safe, we've developed the Stability Education Program, the Safest Catch Program, the Real Fishermen Wear PFDs program, and the Safe on the Wheel program. The mandate of Fish Safe is simple. It's that all fishermen come home safely.
The problem that is often the case is that the history of a lot of struggle, in effect, to try and get legislation has been lost. A lot of people don't realize that it wasn't handed to them on a silver platter. We need to make sure that whatever we've gained in the past, and we've gained a lot, that we keep it.
You know, it's sometimes hard to reflect back on the way that things were because it's so much different now than it was then. I'm sure that all the fishermen are happier for it.
We're moving in the right direction to develop a safety culture where safety becomes an integral part of doing business.
Like I said, it's not perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better when I finished fishing than when I first started as far as safety is concerned.
It'd be great to see an industry where you go out on a boat that's safe to work on. You know what the hazards are, you're able to reduce the risks associated with the hazards. You catch the fish and you come back, you safely deliver the fish, and you go home to your family. The kind of industry we'd like to see.
Safety in the fishing industry, we probably scratched the surface the last 10 years and have just sort of set the foundation. And so hopefully one day everyone will come home safely.